Father, we praise you for allowing us to gather here today and for giving us the freedom to gather here today. I pray that we won't take that for granted, God. We thank you for the opportunity to gather here a few hours ago and to baptize our buddy Sean. And also, I really do want to pray, God, not only for this Bible study, but for the Bible study over the course of the next 2 weeks, because Ben and I are not going to be here. I pray that you will give us safe travels as we go to Israel, but I also pray for everyone as they continue to gather, even in our absence, that they will also conduct Bible studies that are glorifying to you, and that just are, all focused on you, God. And I pray the same thing for this Bible study right here and right now. I pray that your Spirit will be present with us, guiding us into understanding, so that we will not only understand your word according to human wisdom, but that you will supernaturally help us understand it according to how you want it to be understood, God. That we will understand what it was meant to be communicating to its original audience, and then, after having understood that we'll figure out what the heck it has to do with us, if at all. And we will figure out how to apply it, God, and we will figure out how to use it to yearn for you more and to long for you more, God. Help us learn to desire you more by the end of this night than we ever have before, and help us be better equipped to live for your glory in all the days to come. We love you, God. We trust you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Hello, Eric. Okay, that was perfect timing. Nice. Okay, so we are in 2 Samuel chapter 2. And I'm just going to very briefly recap the context of 1 Samuel for us. And then I'm going to have y'all recap the context of 2 Samuel chapter 1 for us. Then we're going to hop right in, because we actually have a pretty lengthy chapter here. But hopefully we will get through it all. Lord willing. Okay, so basically the gist of 1 Samuel is that it takes place at a time whenever Israel had no king. This is a few hundred years after the time of Moses. The people have been freed from Egypt. They have wandered through the wilderness. They have conquered the land of Canaan. They have been dwelling there for a little bit, and they went through this time period of the judges where they went in and out of oppression again and again and again. But eventually you get the last judge, and his name is Samuel. And he's actually a really good dude. He is a really good dude who is in charge at a time when the people are really, really bad. But through Samuel's leadership, the people actually have this massive revival, and they all start worshiping God. And it's amazing. And you think it's going to last forever, but then the very next chapter, of course, they say, we want a king. They're like, yeah, you're all right, but your kids aren't all right. And you know what? All the other nations have kings. We would like a king. And Samuel feels offended by this, because he's like, you're kind of rejecting me. But God says, you know what, Samuel? They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. I was supposed to be their king. If they want a king, let's give them a king. And so God gives them a king just like they asked for. He gives them a king like the nations. And that guy's name is?
Saul.
Saul is tall, dark, and handsome. He is the definition of a worldly king, both in his ability to be charismatic and amazing, but also in his ability to be a totalitarian dictator. And he very quickly is corrupted. We don't know all the details of his reign. The author of Samuel is specifically focusing on the events that lead to the arrival of another king. But we see that he is a failure, and that Saul is mighty in his ability to lead, but not, he's mighty in his ability to lead physically, but not spiritually. And he really is not a very spiritually focused guy. And so eventually God rejects Saul's kingdom, and he says, you know what, your dynasty is not going to last, but I will give another king to the people of Israel. And this man is going to be a man after my own heart. And eventually, a few chapters later, we're introduced to this guy. And what's his name? David. And he immediately becomes king. Is that correct? No. As you'll notice, today, he's finally going to become king. But we're still in 1 Samuel, right? David is just a shepherd boy who's anointed, and he's kind of welcomed into this treasonous conspiracy where he is the prophet Samuel's like, hey, by the way, you're going to be king. And they're like, isn't there already a king on the throne? And he's like, yeah, we're not on good terms right now. And it's like, oh boy. And so David is welcomed into this treasonous conspiracy. It's a total secret. And through the providence of God, David ends up being in the courts of Saul. And he ends up rising through the ranks after he defeats a giant named Goliath, right? And he ends up not only being the chief musician in Saul's courts, but he becomes Saul's armor bearer. And he becomes a warrior. And everybody loves him, and they're singing his praises. He marries one of Saul's daughters. He is best friends with one of Saul's sons. We know he's going to be king. And you're like, yes, this is how it's going to happen. He is on the trajectory to the crown. And then Saul gets jealous. And Saul realizes that David basically has everything except for the crown. And Saul is power hungry, as human rulers typically are. And so he turns against David. And David ends up having to go on the run. And he becomes a fugitive for probably the next decade of his life. And if I'm being honest, that decade of his life is probably when David is at his best. There are moments when he has some hiccups and he does some stupid stuff, but really some of the best psalms that we have come from that time period in David's life, where he is in the desert, he has nothing, and he cries out to God. But eventually he is delivered from that, and that led us to the end of 1 Samuel, where David was actually living in Philistine territory, which is crazy, because David grew to popularity because he defeated a Philistine. But now he's living with the Philistines, and he's marching off to battle to go fight against Saul. And we're wondering what the heck is going to happen here, because even though David's living with the Philistines, we know that he still loves his people, and he's not going to touch a hair on Saul's head. But fortunately for David, by the providence of God, the Philistines send David away. And they say, hey, we get that David's living with us now, but if there was ever a time for David to betray us and get back in Saul's favor, it would be right now. And so they send David away, and David has to go fight this whole other battle. And the Philistines go fight against Saul, and Saul is ultimately killed. And that is where 1 Samuel ends. Because it's not only Saul who's killed, but Saul and practically all of his sons. As we're going to see, not all of them, but most of them. All the ones who were on the line for the throne were killed. Which means that now there is nobody on the throne of Israel. And it's like, guess what? Wonder what's going to happen now. So we flip to 2 Samuel chapter 1, and immediately David's put on the throne, right? No. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 2, and once again, this is the chapter where he's put on the throne. So now I hand it over to y'all. What happened last week? What happened in 2 Samuel chapter 1? Maverick.
That guy came down from the mountain. He looked very dirty. He was all dirtied up. And he brought back Saul's crown, I think.
Yeah.
He came back with it, and he was saying that Saul's dead. You can become king now, or something like that. And David's like, how do you know he's dead? He's like, well, I happened to be up on this mountain, and I saw him leaning against the spear, and supposedly his son was right there, and supposedly he told me to finish him off, so I killed him. And he's like, so this is how it's meant to be. You were meant to have this crown, so I'm giving it to you, or something like that.
That's exactly what happens. Yes. And so it's funny because we go to 1 Samuel, and at the very end, we have the account of Saul's death. And it says that Saul turned to his armor bearer, and he's like, hey, just kill me. And the guy's like, I am not going to kill the king. I am not doing that. And so Saul kills himself. He falls on his own sword. And that's all we know about Saul's death. But at the beginning of 2 Samuel, this guy shows up, and he's an Amalekite warrior or slave, or we don't even know. He's just an Amalekite. We don't know where he came from, but he's running through, and he comes across David, and he's got Saul's crown in his head. And he says that Saul's dead. And David's like, well, what you talking about? And the guy's like, oh yeah, him and all of his sons, they're dead. The throne is yours. And that leads to what you were talking about, where David's like, well, how do you know he's dead? And the guy says, oh, I was there. I actually saw Saul. He was near the point of death, but I guess whenever he pierced himself, it didn't finish him off. And so I was the one who killed Saul, your enemy. And so the guy's really trying to suck up to David, right? He's like thinking like, oh man, like he's definitely fighting for some sort of like political office or something, because we don't know if this guy's story is true or not. The Bible never confirms whether it's true or not, because it really doesn't matter. The point is that this guy does not understand David's heart. So he shows up and he's like, hey David, I'm the one who killed your enemy. I have his crown in my head and I lay it before you, my king. And so David applauds him and puts him as his second command, right? No. What does David do?
Executes him.
Kills him.
What? But he did him such a great favor. Why would he kill him?
He killed the Lord's anointed.
Yeah, how dare you touch the Lord's anointed? This guy does not understand David or his reign. And so this guy shows up and he's boasting about killing the former king. And everybody, like anybody but David would be rejoicing right now. Right? Because Saul has been chasing David for like 10 years. David has been living in caves. David has been depressed. David has gone through so many things because of Saul turning on him. And Saul was formerly like his mentor, right? They were buddies. He has done so much for Saul. Saul turns on him. David has every reason to be bitter and angry against Saul. But David is David. And he doesn't have any animosity. He still loves Saul. And he's like, how dare you? Like, how dare you touch God's king? And so he has the guy killed. And so right off the bat, David makes it very clear that is not how my kingdom is going to be run. We do not fight for office, because that's a big thing David's been doing, right? He does not want anybody thinking that he is fighting his way to the throne. Like, if he's going to end up on the throne, God has to be the one to put him there. And so, if he's a fugitive, he's a fugitive, right? He's fine with that. He's not going to touch a hair on Saul's head. He doesn't like that idea. So this guy coming in there and saying that to him, he's like, not acceptable. But then chapter 1 ends in another surprising way. How does it end?
It ends with a poem or like a song that David wrote about how good Saul was and how good of the actual love that Saul's son showed to David, and how David looked at him as a actual brother and stuff like that.
Yeah, this amazing song where David just starts singing about how noble and amazing King Saul was. And we know that King Saul was really anything but that. But that's not how David wants Saul to be remembered. No matter what all Saul's done against him, David remembers Saul for his greatest acts. Because he says, this is the Lord's anointed. I'm going to exalt him. Which is just amazing. But then he also talks about Jonathan and how an amazing friend Jonathan was. And at the end, we had to talk about that weird stuff where people get all weird about David and Jonathan, but they really take away from the relationship between David and Jonathan whenever they try to make it weird. Right? And so we talked about that. And that leads us to 2 Samuel chapter 2. And at long last, we're going to partly get the fulfillment of what we've been waiting for. Because you see here, it says David anointed king of Judah. He's not going to be anointed the king of all Israel right now. Because really, as a result of what Saul was doing against David, the kingdom kind of was divided. Right? It actually kind of foreshadows what's going to happen after the reign of Solomon, whenever the kingdom is officially divided into Israel and Judah. But right now, it's actually kind of divided because David is from what tribe? Judah. He's from the tribe of Judah. And even whenever he was living with the Philistines, he was still kind of helping out the people of Judah. And so the people of Judah love David, but all the other tribes are still kind of devoted to Saul. Right? And so we're going to have this split. And what's going to happen is that in this chapter, David's going to be anointed king of Judah. And then in the 2 chapters to come, chapters 3 and chapter 4, we're going to see the 2 main obstacles to David being the king over all the nation. And it's really in the roles of 2 different people, a guy named Abner and a guy named Ishbosheth, both of whom are going to be players in this chapter today. So we're going to get introductions to them. Those 2 guys are going to be the main 2 obstacles for David being king over the whole place, and they're both going to die in the next 2 chapters. And then, once you get to chapter 5, David will be officially anointed king over all Israel. Right? And so that's where we're heading. But today, we got to count our victories where we can, right? We've been waiting a long time for David to become king, and we're going to see it today. So that's really cool. So let's start going through it. Sean is here with us. Sean, could you, with your epic Bible reading voice, read this whole slide for us?
I can try.
No pressure.
After this, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." David said, "To which shall I go up?" And he said, "To Hebron." So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, and the Asherites, and Jezreel, and Ephraim, and Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months.
All right, cool. So here we finally have it. David is anointed king. Kind of exciting, right? I mean, once again, when it comes to significant events in like the history of the world, this is one of those really big moments, right? Because ultimately, who is David's heir? Long term. Why are we gathered here right now? Jesus, right? Yeah, Jesus. He is ultimately the king, right? I don't know what God's total plan was prior to the people of Israel asking for a king, right? I mean, obviously we knew that eventually the Messiah was going to come either way, but the main title that the Messiah holds, like the word Messiah, what does it mean? Anointed one, right? Whenever we encounter the word anointed, it's the Hebrew word Mashiach, right? So David being anointed here, this is a significant moment because ultimately David being on the throne right here is what ultimately sets the the pathway to Jesus being on the throne, and that's going to be an eternal kingdom that we ourselves are going to belong to. So this is a really big moment, and I don't want us to like overlook that. Like this has extreme relevance for us right here, right now. But you might not even think about that when you're just reading through it. All right, this is a longer chapter, so we're not going to go as in depth as I would like, but we're just going to we're going to get through it, and you're going to hopefully understand the story. After this, David inquired of the Lord. Okay, right off the bat, what's ironic about that? If you remember, we've talked about this in the past. Sean's nodding his head. What is it, Sean?
He shouted to the Lord.
Yes. This is, once again, where it's helpful to know a little bit of Hebrew, because the word to inquire, it's the word to ask. In Hebrew, it's Shaul. The name Saul, it means to ask. It's the same exact word, right? So one thing that we notice under Saul's reign is that Shaul never Shauled, right? He very rarely ever inquired of God, right? And his name literally meant to inquire. There was only one time he actually inquired of God, and at that point he was too far gone, and it says that God literally didn't respond. Whereas David, on the other hand, is constantly Shauling, right? Like, so David is doing what Saul was supposed to do. And so that's just one of those kind of like clever little puns that's it's constantly put in there, right? Shaul never Shauled, but David Shauled all the time. Because David really was the king that the people needed, right? Saul was the one they deserved. David was the one they needed. So after this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? So right here is this big moment where David recognizes that, yes, he doesn't like how Saul was taken out, but the implications are clear. He knows that decades earlier, God told him he would be king. And there's no longer a king here. And he doesn't want to claim the throne for himself, so he asks God, basically, is now the time? Right? Like, is this the moment? Am I supposed to go into the cities? Because where's he been living?
In caves?
Well, he's been living...
Ziklag?
He's been living in Ziklag, which is Philistine territory, right? He's been living with the Philistines, but finally he's turning to God and says, is it time for me to return to my people? And the only way he's returning to his people is if it's time for him to be exalted, right? Is it time for me to go and be made king? Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. So this is the moment, right? Like, you know, like it's building up to this. Like, yes, finally, he's returning to his people. This is the triumphant return of the king. David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. Long story short, Hebron is a city down in the area of Judah, right? So if you're imagining like the map, like, you know, you have the Sea of Galilee up here, Jordan River going down, Dead Sea, right? If you go a little bit inwards, you have Jerusalem. A little bit south, you have Bethlehem. Way down here is Hebron, right? This whole region, Judea, right? I know I just drew that whole thing, but hopefully you're tracking with me. Hebron is down here. And the main reason I highlight that is because once David becomes the king of all Israel, he's going to move his capital. And rather than being king in Hebron, which is in the center of Judea, he's going to go to Jerusalem, which is right at the cusp between Judah and Israel, right? Because he's uniting the whole nation, right? He's making a very concerted effort to centralize the thing, so he's bringing everybody together. But for right now, he's going to go to Hebron, right? So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. We read about them in 1 Samuel. We've addressed the fact that David he doesn't make wise decisions when it comes to women. His son is going to pick that up from him. David's a great guy, but he is just stupid when it comes to girls. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. Just going back to what we saw in 1 Samuel, what's kind of cool about the fact that it says he brought his men and everyone in their household?
The men that were with them were strayaways. Nobody wanted them, so he took them in.
Yeah, so he took them in, but even more specifically, do you remember what happened to the households of these men back when they were in Ziklag?
Not good.
Didn't they get destroyed?
Actually,
They got captured by the Philistines?
Well, yeah, by the Amalekites.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, the Amalekites came in and they stole all the families. And then David and his men, they just went down there and brought them all back. And so this is one of those things where, once again, you have to kind of remember that 1 and 2 Samuel technically are one book. Right? So really, like, we've spent multiple weeks since we've been in that story, but this is really just like a few days earlier. Or like, I don't know how long passed after the death of Saul before he did this, but this is still fresh on their minds. And so not only did he save their families and bring them back to Ziklag, but now he's bringing them back to their own people. And he's taking them to his capital, what's going to be his capital city for a while, and he's giving them houses. Like, this is really, really cool, especially whenever Samuel talked to the people and said what a king would do. What did he say that the king would do? Take, take, take. But David is giving, giving, giving. Right? He says, you know what I'm going to take? I'm going to take everything from the Amalekites and give it all to you. Right? So he's actually providing for his people rather than just taking. Unfortunately, David will end up doing what kings do, and he will end up succumbing in many ways to the temptations of power. But he will turn back to God and repent. But unfortunately, there's going to be consequences for that. We're going to see that in 2 Samuel. So he gets his men. They go up to Hebron. They live there. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. Right? So now everybody gathers together. This is just a really cool moment. Right? David returns. For the longest time, David has kind of been like this Robin Hood figure who's just been kind of like Robin Hood meets Batman. Right? He's been like this guy living in the shadows, helping out people, and whenever he can, he'll like get his men together, and they've been helping out the people of Judah in whichever way they could. But he's also been a fugitive, right? So he's been kind of a vigilante, right? He's doing this stuff while also on the run from Saul. And so the people have been accepting his help, but they couldn't openly endorse him. But now Saul is dead. Now nobody is opposing David. David comes back. It's the triumphant return, right? I mean, this is just a cool moment. This is the little shepherd boy David who ended up becoming the greatest warrior, and then he was a fugitive who was still helping them out. Like, this dude's reputation is just, like, killer. And, like, you can just imagine the celebration they had whenever he's returning back to Hebron. And they're like, man, like, this is amazing. And all the people of Judah gather down, and all the men come, and they anoint him, right? There's no prophet mentioned here, because they know. Like, the rumor's been going around for decades, right? Everybody said, yeah, I heard that old Jesse, his son got anointed king. I don't think Saul's going to like that. People have been hearing about this. And finally, they can do it openly without anybody getting mad at them, right? Now they're not committing treason. There's no king. They anoint him. They make him king. It's just a really exciting moment. When they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show chesed and faithfulness to you, right? So steadfast love. Those two words, chesed and emet. I'll talk about that in a second. May he show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Now this is really telling. David has just been anointed king over Judah, and the question becomes, what is the first thing the king is going to do? Whenever Saul was anointed king, do you remember what he did?
did he gather up an army?
He did, but before that, he just went back home. Remember, next time we find Saul, he's just out there like with the oxen, and people were like, hey, these people did stuff. And it's also associated with Jabesh Gilead. Remember, because the people of Jabesh Gilead needed help, and they're like, hey, Saul, your people are in, they're in danger. And Saul's out there just like he's with the ox. He's like, huh? Oh, I guess I should do something. And then he does this crazy thing where he takes a bull and he chops it into 12 pieces and ships it throughout the land. He's like, if you don't fight for me, then I will do the same thing to your animals. And it's a really brutal moment. And you're like, oh, so it kind of sets the precedent for who Saul is going to be as a king. right? I mean, right off the bat, you're seeing this is a pretty brutal guy who's going to do things in a very worldly manner. David, on the other hand, what is the first thing he does?
He gives a blessing to the person that buried Saul.
Yeah. He says, like, what's up with the people of Jabesh Gilead? They're the ones who buried him. Okay. Yeah, so they come up to him and they say, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. And David responds, and he's like, well, what can I do then to just, like, thank them? So right off the bat, we have David establishing a very different type of kingdom. Jabesh Gilead is not in the land of Judah. It's up north, right? So this isn't even his territory. He's like, thank you so much for what you did for Saul. He's not demonstrating any bitterness against Saul and what he did. His first act as king that's recorded here is actually an act of love towards the people who were kind enough to take care of their former king, even though the king was the one who was chasing David for so long. Right off the bat, you just see this is a different dude. He's just a really cool guy. So he sends messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by Yahweh, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Y'all remember this story, right? It was at the end of 1 Samuel. Do you remember what the Philistines did with the head of Saul?
Chop it off.
Yeah, they chopped it off, and then they went and hung the bodies and everything at Bet Shean, right? Which Ben and I, we're going to be going to Bet Shean, so we'll get to see that place. But yeah, they went and hung this stuff up, and then the men of Jabesh Gilead went by night, and they took it down, and they actually gave it a proper burial. And so David says, may God bless you for that. Thank you for showing respect to your king. Now may Yahweh show you hesed and faithfulness. This is just cool. Like, y'all know how much I love the word hesed, right? That's why I don't... Steadfast love, it's great. But hesed is just one of those words I feel like should just be transliterated because it's hard to give it a good English word, right? It's steadfast love, loving kindness, love. Like, it can be translated as many different things. But how... Like what do we talk about whenever we talk about hesed? How have we kind of defined that word?
Isn't it agape?
Agape is the Greek word for love. But how have we specifically talked about hesed? What is the kind of the working definition that we've kind of given there? Y'all got the word on y'all's shirts. Is anybody wearing it today?
No.
Maverick is. There you go. Okay. Hesed. What is hesed? Oh, Ben's wearing it underneath. It's his, like, superhero shirt.
Superman.
The way we've talked about hesed, it is whenever somebody does something for you that you have no right to expect from them, right? It really is just an act of kindness, but it's almost more than that, right? It's a kindness that you can count on, even though you have no right to expect it, right? It's something that flows from somebody's character, right? And so David turns to these people and says, I hope that God shows you hesed. And he also used this other word, in Hebrew it's the word emet. The only reason I highlight that is because there's this one dude named Michael Card who wrote this amazing book about hesed. And he uses this fancy term called linguistic gravity. And he says that hesed is such a beautiful word that it almost has this gravitational pull to where anytime hesed shows up, it draws other words around it just to kind of explain what this word means. And the word emet is one of those words. It's the word that most often shows up there. So you'll always see steadfast love and faithfulness because they're tied together, right? A person who shows hesed is a person who is faithful. And a person who is faithful is a person who shows hesed. And so I just always really like that. I like to highlight it. It's not super important to this, other than the fact that David is saying, I hope God shows you those two things. And I will do good to you too, because you've done this thing. So he's saying, I hope God does good to you, and I'm going to do good to you. Because who is David trying to emulate with his reign? Who's he trying to reflect?
Jesus.
God, right? So if God is showing him them hesed and faithfulness, he's like, I want to do the same thing. Now therefore, let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So he says, yes, there is going to be a change in things, because Saul is dead. He's gone. But don't be afraid. I'm king now, and I'm going to take care of you. Right? So all because I'm in charge, I don't want you to be afraid because you showed kindness to Saul, and you think that I'm going to be bitter against you. No, I'm proud that you did that. You did a very good thing. Thank you for doing that. So right off the bat, David's just showing that he's a different type of king. Once again, this is just going to be funny stuff. We're bringing up more Hebrew stuff than I typically like to in a Bible study, but it's funny. But Abner the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead and the Asherites and Jezreel and Ephraim and Benjamin and all Israel. All right, Abner the son of Ner. What's funny about that?
Abner means my father is Ner.
Yeah, Abner literally means like Abba, father. So Abner means my father is Ner. So when it says Abner is Ner, son of Ner, it says my father is Ner, son of Ner. That cracks me up because almost every time Abner is referenced in the book of Samuel, it always does that. And I don't know why the author does that, other than maybe it makes me think that he's just wanting you to not take Abner as seriously as you should. Right? Because Abner was the commander of Saul's army. Right? And what we're going to see in the chapters to come is that Abner's actually going to defect and start supporting David. But Abner is really just he's just kind of this weasel. Right? He's kind of just really looking out for himself, and he's really just trying to take power for himself. And it seems like he really kind of is the one who wants to be king, but he's also just not very good at his job a lot of the times. And so I don't know why the author does this, but I have this sneaking suspicion that maybe he just does this so that whenever you read it, you can't help but laugh. Right? Abner is Ner, son of Ner. It's like, you just can't take the guy very seriously whenever every time he's mentioned, it's, my father is Ner, son of Ner. It just seems like a joke, right? I don't know if that's what the author was going for, but that's my headcanon, right? So, my father is Ner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, and the Asherites, and Jezreel, and Ephraim, and Benjamin, and all Israel. Okay, so what does Abner do?
Does he anoint David?
Not David.
Son.
Saul's son.
Abner.
Yeah, Ishbosheth. Where the heck did this guy come from? This is actually very interesting too, because we don't know anything about Ishbosheth. The only sons that we knew about prior to this moment were all killed, right? They were killed in battle. That's the whole reason why everybody's like, oh, I guess David's king now. But now Ishbosheth is one of Saul's sons. This leads many people to speculate that maybe Ishbosheth was the son of a concubine rather than a main wife. Right, so all the sons of the main wives died, and so maybe Ishbosheth was he's really the last resort. Why would Abner do this? David has just been anointed king. Why would Abner just go find some random guy and put him on the throne?
Is that like a dig at David?
Yes, it's a dig at David, but also what else? What is he trying to accomplish? Yeah, he's trying to demonstrate he's still loyal to Saul, and I think he recognizes that if David has been made a king of Judah, it's not long until he becomes king of the whole place. Because David, we've just talked about this, everybody who encounters David ends up loving him. He's just this amazing guy. Even the Philistines end up loving David, and literally the reason he rose to power was by killing their greatest warrior. Right? So everybody just loves David, and I think Abner recognizes that, because Abner's been around David plenty of times. David has called Abner out on his inability to protect Saul. Do you remember the second time that David spared Saul? He literally crept into the camp, and he takes Saul's spear, and he says, hey, Abner, why aren't you protecting the Lord's anointed? And so Abner, he knows who David is. He knows that David's a powerful dude. And I think he recognizes, okay, if David's king here, it's not long before he's king over everything. And he says the last chance we have to preserve Saul's kingdom is by taking one of Saul's, that's why it makes sense to me that it's a concubine son. Because I don't think that Ishbosheth really matters. You'll notice, Ishbosheth is an obstacle to David becoming king. But Ishbosheth really is not an active character throughout these next two chapters. He is just a background guy. Literally all he's doing is sitting on the throne, but he doesn't really actively do much. Really, he's just kind of there. And Abner is really kind of the sitting king. Right? Really, Ishbosheth is just a placeholder in order for Abner to really have his own kingdom. Because if you get a son of Saul, okay, well now you have a claim to the throne. And sure, he might be a concubine son, but all the other sons are dead. What do you do? Okay. So he takes Ishbosheth, he puts him on the throne, and he's kind of creating this whole puppet kingdom, right? Where Ishbosheth is just doing his bidding. And Abner is really kind of the pseudo-king here. And I think it's really him just recognizing, ooh, this is my time to shine. Saul's out of the way, everybody else is out of the way. I don't want David to be king over me because David probably doesn't like me very much. Okay, and this is what I'm saying. He's kind of just a Weasley guy who just wants to be in charge. And so I think that's what he's doing, right? So he gets Ishbosheth. This guy, like, I don't think it's supposed to be surprising that we've never heard of him either, right? That's the whole point, right? Who the heck is Ishbosheth? Exactly, right? It's like, he just takes some random guy. He's like, hey, anybody here descended from Saul? He's like, well, yeah, Saul had like one concubine and like, I'm his son. And he's like, you'll work. Okay. And so he just gets Ishbosheth, he puts him on the throne, and he becomes king of all these different things, right? So you just see Abner politically maneuvering everything. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. Oh, so this probably did not go how Abner was hoping, because Abner was probably hoping, okay, well, if I put one of Saul's sons on the throne, maybe the people of Judah will like recognize, oh, well, we don't want to oppose Saul anymore, so like let's just, David, forget about that. We're going to go serve him. But Judah's like, no, we've made our decision. David is our king. Saul's kingdom has come to its end. Like, Saul and his sons died, and that was divine judgment from God. David's our king now, right? So the people of Judah, they made their decision, but we get these pictures, right? Ishbosheth is 10 years older than David, right? David is 30 years old. Ishbosheth is 40, which, if you think about that, it suggests quite a bit about Jonathan, because if Ishbosheth is 10 years older than David, and Jonathan was Saul's oldest son, that suggests that Jonathan and David were probably not that close in age, right? Which is just really remarkable whenever you think about their friendship. Because David and Jonathan didn't become friends when David was 30 years old. They became friends when David was probably 17. And that's just really remarkable because that means Jonathan very well could have been 20 years older than David. And the fact that they're buddies like that, either Jonathan was super immature or David was super mature, or they were both chasing after God. And they were just mutually bonded over, they bonded over that, right? And so I just think that's kind of cool. But Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Doesn't sound like a very impressive reign, does it? 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So Ishbosheth's not going to be king for long. David will be at Hebron for longer, but then eventually he will be made king over the whole thing. We move on to the next part. Could you read that for us?
Yeah. Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab the son of Zeruiah, can't talk today, and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool, and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then they arose and passed over by number, 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side. So they fell down together. Therefore that place was called Helkath Hazarim, which is at Gibeon. And the battle was very fierce that day. And Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. And the 3 sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. And Asahel pursued Abner. As he went, he turned neither to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, is it you, Asahel? And he answered, it is I. Abner said to him, turn aside to your right hand or to your left, and seize one of the young men and take his spoil. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again to Asahel, turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab? But he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out of his back. And he fell there and died where he was. And all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still.
All right. This is a wild story. There's so much that goes on here, and I think maybe I'm just in a weird mood, but to me this seems like it's supposed to be kind of funny. But there's also a lot of very dramatic things going on here as well. But the way that the story is told, I can just imagine, an old bard sitting around with a bunch of children around a campfire and telling this story, and the kids just cracking up laughing. because what happens here is just, it's kind of ridiculous. So 2 things you need to know. Let me just quiz y'all. All right. Who is Abner in relationship to Saul?
General.
He was his general, right? He was the commander. Who is Joab in relationship to David? Commander, right? Same thing, right? So Abner was to Saul what Joab is to David. So now Abner is to Ishbosheth what Joab is to David, right? They're also related, right? So Abner was the cousin of Saul. Joab is the nephew of David. But I imagine they're all probably around the same age. Like, Abner's probably significantly older than Ishbosheth, so I imagine like Abner's maybe in his like 60s or something at this point. Whereas Ishbosheth whereas Joab is probably the same age as David, because David was the youngest of all of his brothers, and Joab is his sister's son, right? And so most likely Joab and David are around the same age. Just keep that in mind. These are like, the families are all connected here, right? So, my father is Ner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, right? So, they both happen to they go out to the same place, right? And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon, right? So, you have all of Ishbosheth's men with Abner. They go down to Gibeon. And then you have Joab with all the servants of David, and they also come to this pool. Why they did it? I don't know. Were they planning on meeting here? I don't know. It seems like they were, but we're not given any more information in this, right? We just know that they both ended up at the same place at the same time, and they sat down, the one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Kind of a humorous setting here, right? You've got these 2 kingdoms who haven't outright declared war on each other yet, but if past grievances say anything, they probably are not the best of friends, right? Because literally, the northern kingdom, well, their former ruler had been trying to kill the guy who's now in charge of the southern kingdom for quite some time. And so, yeah, these 2 kingdoms aren't necessarily at war yet, but, I mean, unless they're going to say bygones be bygones, there's some tension simmering between them. And now here you have the commanders of both armies with a bunch of their soldiers right here, and they're just sitting across a pool from one another. It seems almost like battle lines being drawn, but that's not how it's described, right? It's not like, oh, they went to war with one another. That's how other things have been described in Samuel, but that's not what this is. They just go there, and there they are sitting. And I don't know. I picture it, and it's kind of funny, right? They're just sitting there. They just see them across the water, and it's almost like they're trying to decide, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to address the awkwardness in the room right now? And Abner said to Joab, let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Okay, so how do they address this tension between them?
They let their men fight each other.
Yeah, let's have a competition. Let's see whose men are more macho, right? That seems like what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily seem that adversarial, right? I mean, if anything, it almost seems like they're just having a little bit of fun. Like, the thing is, there is this underlying tension. But what they're saying doesn't sound outright bad, right? No, let's let them compete. Yeah, let's let them compete. Like, if I were filming a movie here, this is one of those things where you would want to be really zoomed in on the people's face. Because what they're saying and what they're intending seem to be 2 different things, right? What they're saying is like, hey, let's just get some guys out here. Let's just have some fun, everybody pull out their swords and we'll just see who's tougher. But if you zoom in on their faces, let them compete. Yeah, let them compete. It's like there's some tension underneath here, and they're like, let's see who's gonna win this thing, right? And once again, we just don't know enough context to really say dogmatically, but to me that's the best way to read it, or the most natural way, right? And we've seen this in Samuel, right, where there's so much nuance in things to where it's really about the heart behind things, and so really you have to wait to see what comes from something to see what the words really meant in the beginning. And very quickly, this competition is going to turn into a bloodbath. And so it's like, okay, so maybe they didn't have a competition in mind, because usually this is not how karate tournaments go. Usually Usually they're a little bit more civil. So they say, let him arise. Let him arise. Absolutely. Then they arose and passed over by number, 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 for the servants of David. All right, so they're like, hey, y'all 12. Y'all are going to go fight the other 12.
It's a soccer game.
Yeah, it's a soccer game, right? 12 on 12, it'll be fine. Just go out there, have fun, and see who wins. Verse 16. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side, so they fell down together.
Ouch.
That was a weird soccer game.
They have no clue how to play.
What?
They have no clue how to play.
Yeah, Joab and Abner are like, man, these guys forgot the rules. They have no clue how to play. Yeah. So, that wasn't the friendly competition it started out as at the beginning, did it? Turns out that there is some lingering animosity between these two groups, and they go out there for some friendly competition, but boom! Swords are planted through people, and now 24 people lay dead.
Yo.
Uh-oh. This is not sounding good. Therefore, that place was called Helkath Hazurim, which is at Gibeon. I literally just looked it up whenever Sean was reading it to see what this word meant, and I already forgot. It means the plot of the sharp blades, right? So the land with the sharp blades, because it's like, apparently this story went down, and they're like, do you remember that place? Where like they went out there for a friendly competition, and then everybody died? It was wild. So each caught his opponent by his head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side, and they fell down together. Therefore, that place was called Helkath Hazurim, which is in Gibeon. And the battle was very fierce that day. Battle? Where did this come from? We didn't hear anything about a battle. Yeah, as soon as people started killing each other, you can imagine that all the other soldiers were like, oh, it's going down, right? And so you have all these testosterone-fueled men who are like, yeah, battle! And now, war has broken out, right? Now, all of a sudden, the kingdom of Ishbosheth and the kingdom of David have officially, they're now fighting each other. Notice who's not present at either of these things, though, right? Where is David and where is Ishbosheth? Notably absent. Right? So the kings are not the ones who are starting this feud. It is the commanders. Right? Because both Abner and Joab, they're really the ones who like being in power. And one thing, so just so you keep these characters in line, Abner, like I mentioned, he's kind of the weasel who just is really trying to get his way into power. Joab, on the other hand, if there's one thing that you take away from the book of Samuel, don't mess with Joab. Joab is ruthless. This guy, if you do one thing to him, like if you give him a bad look, he will kill you. Right? If you do anything against him, he will destroy your family. Right? That's just kind of the dude Joab is. He does not forgive. He is ruthless. Whenever David eventually has Uriah killed after the thing with Bathsheba, do you know who he has the letter delivered to? Joab. Because he's like, yeah, Joab will have no problem doing this. He's like, yeah, hey, just put that guy at the front of the army and then pull back. Joab's like, I'm just going to do that anyways. Yeah, Joab is not a good guy, right? He is ruthless. And that's kind of one of the issues with David is that he allows him to stay in charge because David recognized that Joab is a very good commander, but he's not a very spiritual dude, right? And so that's probably one of those places where it's like, David, maybe fire your nephew and get a new commander. But yeah, so the battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. So Joab comes out on top, right? Abner, they lose severely, and very quickly it's revealed, okay, yeah, the people of Judah, they are the winners here. And the 3 sons of Zeruiah were there. Who is Zeruiah?
Joab's dad?
Joab's mother.
Oh.
Yes, yeah. So this is David's sister, right? So David's older sister, Zeruiah, she had 3 sons, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. You're going to remember those names because they're going to become important later on, right? This is one of those things where I've compared 1st and 2nd Samuel to the biblical Game of Thrones. This is where you really start seeing it come out because you're seeing that this is really a game of fighting, feuding parties and feuding families and stuff, right? So there's the house of David, there's the house of Saul, and that's really what 1st and 2nd Samuel is all about, right? And then eventually, the house of David's going to be the one in charge, but then that's also going to fracture into all these different things as well, right? So it really is a big political game. And so you've got David's sister Zeruiah, and her 3 sons are all at this battle. There's Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. He's a good runner, right? He is fast. He's got a reputation for being a quick dude. And Asahel pursued Abner. And as he went, he turned neither to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Okay, so Abner, he was Saul's commander. So how old do you think Abner is?
In his 40s, possibly.
Oh, he's probably older than that. Ishbosheth is 40.
Probably 60.
Abner's probably up there in age, right? So here Abner, this older dude, he's running away. And then you have gazelle-footed, what's his name? Asahel. I always remember Abishai and Joab, but I always forget Asahel. Asahel, swift-footed Asahel. He's chasing after him. It says he looks neither right nor left. What does that mean when it says he looks neither right nor left?
He was focused.
He's focused. This is how the Bible's going to describe David when it comes to his faithfulness to God, right? It's going to say that David looked neither right nor left because he was always focused on God. He never turned to any other pagan gods, right? And that's how it'll describe future kings. It'll say they were like David, turning neither right nor left, or they were not like David. They turned right or left, right? And they worshiped other gods. So it's the idea of total focus. And so you've got old Abner running away, and then swift-footed Asahel chasing after him, pinpoint focus. Who do you think is going to win this? Or at least who's going to win the foot race? Asahel, right? He's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take him down. And so you can imagine, you can imagine the scene. They're running through the woods. Asahel is gaining ground quickly. You can feel the tension. Then Abner looked behind him and said, "Is it you, Asahel?" He's like, "Oh man, is that you?" And he answered, "It is I." And Abner said to him, "Turn aside to your right hand or to your left and seize one of the young men and take his spoil." So what does Abner say?
Go attack somebody else.
Abner's like, "Bro, go kill anybody else and take whatever you want, but don't kill me." He's like, he's just like, "Stay away from me." But what you're going to see is that Abner isn't actually as cowardly as you think. When he says it, it sounds like he's a coward, right? It sounds like he's like, "Dude, just kill whoever." Like, it sounds like he's just fighting for his life. But really, Abner knows the principle that I just told y'all about Joab. Don't mess with Joab. And Asahel is gaining on him. And he recognizes that, yes, Asahel might be the better runner, but Abner's the better fighter. And he recognized that if Asahel catches him and it comes down to a fight, he's going to kill Asahel. And if he kills Asahel, who's going to be after him? Joab. And so he sounds like a coward. And he's like, "Dude, kill anybody else. Just take whatever you want. Don't take me." So Asahel would not turn aside from following him. Asahel's like, "Nope, you're the one I want." And Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab?" He's like, "Dude, if you keep following me, I will attack you. And if I attack you, you will die. And if you die, how could I ever look your brother in the face again? Because your brother, he loves you. And if you attack me, don't put me in this place." So it's funny how it just so quickly turns, right? Whenever you first hear him, you think he's a coward. He's like, "Nope, I'm not a coward. I'm just smart. And I know that if I hurt you, somebody who is better than me is going to come after me." Right? So Abner knows he's a better fighter than Asahel, but Abner also knows that Joab is a more ruthless fighter than Abner. And Abner has a little bit of self-respect. And he's like, "I do not want to face your brother." And he's thinking long-term consequences here. He's not in the moment. He's like, "Nope, I know who your brother is. I do not want to dirty my hands with this. Don't force me to do this, because that honestly just is very inconvenient for me." And so he kind of is fighting for his life here, but it's not because he's afraid of Asahel. It's because he's afraid of Joab. And so it's kind of funny. But he says, "How could I lift up my face to your brother Joab? How could I even look him in the eyes after that, knowing that I killed his own brother?" But he refused to turn aside. So Asahel, he's kind of cocky, right? He's running. He's like, "Oh yeah, I got this guy." And he's refusing, and Abner's giving him time and time again. He's like, "Dude, go any other place. Please don't put me in this position." And Asahel's like, "No, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you." And we don't know Asahel's intention, right? I mean, this is the first time he's been introduced to the story, and this is the last time we're going to really hear about him, other than whenever Joab responds. But Asahel, what were his motives? Maybe he thought, if I kill Abner, maybe we'll be able to take out Ishbosheth, and maybe the kingdoms will be David's. We don't know. Asahel just wanted Abner. Therefore, Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out at his back.
Ouch.
This testifies to probably two things. Both the swiftness of Asahel and how his speed became his own undoing, and probably the strength of Abner. Right? Because it doesn't say that he pierced him with the sharp end of the spear. It says he pierced him with the butt of the spear. That's the backside. That's the blunt end. And here Asahel is chasing after him, and I guess he's running with his spear, and then finally you can just imagine Abner, he's like, fine, dude. Like, Asahel's catching up with him, he's right on his tail. Abner just stops, boom! And just, it's like, oh no. Like, and nobody wins here, right? Asahel is dead, so he didn't get what he wanted, and Abner killed Asahel, and he knows that that's not good for him. And so this is a lose-lose situation. It's almost like that's what happens whenever people ask for a king, whenever they weren't supposed to have a king, and now a bunch of people end up suffering as a result. Right? So all of this stuff we have to recognize, it's just fallout from the people's original request. We want a king like the nations. This is what ends up happening. People end up feuding, lives are lost, and you have two people who, on their own, are both amazing, accomplished people. Right? You've got Asahel, who's a great runner. Man, I mean, just go sign him up for a marathon or something. Don't send him chasing after Abner. And then you have Abner, who's a very smart individual, who's thinking ahead. He's strong. Both of them are very impressive people, but they bring about their own undoing, right? And so it's just kind of a really like Abner doesn't do this because he is bloodthirsty, right? Yes, Abner is a weasel, but that means he's self-seeking, and he realizes this does not benefit him, and it's going to bite him in the butt later on, because guess who's going to end up killing Abner? Joab. Right? And so Abner's 100% correct here. He recognizes this is not going to be good, but what can you do? It's either be killed by Asahel or be killed by Joab, and he says, okay, well, if I kill Asahel now, maybe I can figure something out about Joab later. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of the spear, so that the spear came out at his back, and he fell there and died where he was. And all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still. Why didn't they stood still?
Because
They recognized what just happened. And if you ask me, who do you think they're thinking about right now? Probably Joab. This is where, it's kind of a really human moment right here, right? It's like the battle comes to a standstill, and they all walk up, and they see who's dead. And you can just hear a pin drop. They're like, is that Joab's brother? Oh, crud. This is not good. We move on. All right, Sean. This is the end of this chapter right here.
All right. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. And the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group and took their stand on top of a hill. Then Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" And Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight any more. And Abner and his men went all that night through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, and marching the whole morning, they came to Mahanaim. Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, they were missing from David's servants 19 men besides Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke upon them at Hebron.
All right. So the battle comes to an end. Any first thoughts?
360 men later.
Yeah, a lot of people died here. Landslide victory on David's part, though, huh? I mean, 19 men beside Asahel died from David's side. 360 died from Saul's side. That's what, 18 times the amount? That's pretty wild, right? Ishbosheth lost 18 men for every one of David's. Like that's a pretty good battle. Oh, not for Ishbosheth, but for David. All right. So everybody else comes to a standstill, but Joab and Abishai pursue Abner. Why would they pursue Abner?
They're the brothers.
Yeah, they're like, you just killed our brother. And so they're chasing after Abner, right? And once again, they're oh, you heading out? I will see you in Israel, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting. That's kind of cool to say.
Till then.
Yep. See you then. Keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. I'll see you on the other side of the world.
Amen.
Yeah, man.
See you later.
Okay. Be safe.
Sir, yes, sir.
Make smart choices.
When y'all leaving?
Yep. What's that?
When y'all leaving?
We leave tomorrow. So yeah, he leaves at like 8:30 in the morning. I don't leave until 9 o'clock at night. So yeah, we're on different flights and stuff. But yeah. So Joab and Abishai pursue Abner, and as the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. Right, and so they've been pursuing each other for a while because it started in Gibeon, and now they're moving out of the city, and the sun is going down. Right, so this has been a pretty long battle. Right, they've been chasing them, and now they're all gathering together. And the people of Benjamin, whose side is that? People of Benjamin.
Abner's side.
That's Abner's side, right? Because what tribe was Saul from?
Benjamin.
Benjamin, right? Okay, so the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group and took their stand on the top of a hill. Right? So this is really where, okay, they're like, we're done fleeing, let's turn around and fight. Right? And so you can just imagine all of them gathering here. They're on top of the hill, and if you've ever watched Star Wars, you know who's in the advantageous spot right here.
People on the high ground.
The people on the high ground. Yes, exactly. Right? So Saul's men, they now have the high ground. Right? And they're looking down at them, and they're saying, okay, it's time to take our stand. Right? It doesn't make any sense to run down the other side of the hill. Now that we have the high ground, let's turn around and let's face these guys. But what we're going to see is that really they're saying, can we just stop? Because they've already lost a lot of people. They're like, this is, even with the high ground, it's not looking too good for us. But we have this advantageous spot. Let's turn and let's try to negotiate. And the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group and took their stand on top of a hill. Then Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" So what does Abner say?
When are you going to call this off, basically?
Yeah, when are you going to call this
It's
off?
kind of pleading.
Yeah.
Because he's talking about brother turning against brother.
Yeah. Honestly, this is really, I kind of like what Abner says here. It kind of makes me like Abner a little bit more. Not enough to like him, but it makes me like him more than normal. But yeah, he says, "Will the sword devour forever?" Which, obviously, you have to recognize that there is political scheming behind all this. This dude is losing this battle big time. And so, really, he can't say, "Hey, y'all better back down or we'll kill y'all." Well, no. It's very clear, even with the low ground, Joab's men are going to win. Right? That's very clear right off the bat. But they do have the advantageous spot, and therefore it's well, we'll take down more of your men too. And so really the only thing that Abner can do is make an emotional appeal. Right? How long shall the sword devour? Right? Shall it devour forever? He's like, guys, we just were at this pool and things just got out of hand. How long is this going to keep on going? I mean, because the thing is, really, this doesn't start with them. Right? It goes back to Saul and David. Right? It goes back to what Saul did, devouring people with the sword. Right? It goes back to what they've been doing with the Philistines. In many ways, it's almost a commentary on the whole book of Samuel. Right? Because you have all these people being killed and killing and being killed and killing. Shall the sword devour forever? When is it all going to end? When's it going to be enough? When are we going to be done with the bloodshed? And when are we actually going to dwell in unity? And that really is the question. Because you recognize that the only way to stop with the sword devouring is for God to be king. Right? That's kind of the issue. Right? The people asked for people to be devoured by the sword whenever they asked for a king, because that's exactly what Samuel told them. Right? he will take your sons and he will take them off to war. And I don't even know if he said that. You can probably look it up. He probably said something along the lines of them being devoured by the sword. Right? Because that's exactly what you asked for. You asked for this, and now you're complaining about it. Are you shocked? You asked for a king to be put in charge. God was supposed to be the king. And that's the cool thing for us, because we can actually take that phrase and we can ask the same question. Because we look at the world around us, and once again, I'm not trying to intentionally make this about us. I just like the question, shall the sword devour forever? You can ask that about our present culture, right? We look at the world around us and we see that the sword is still devouring nowadays, even if we don't use swords. We actually use weapons that are a lot scarier than swords, right? We have weapons that are like, the sword was a very terrifying weapon back then. Think about what we have nowadays, right? When will it stop? Well, we only have one solution, right? That's the thing that we are literally waiting for with every day. We are waiting for the day when Christ returns and brings us into that kingdom where the sword will not devour things. But this story took place 3,000 years ago, and we're still waiting, right? And so, really, it's such a simple question. Shall the sword devour forever? But it's as true nowadays as it was back then. And so I just really like Abner saying that. Like, shall the sword devour forever? It's like, yeah, he is scheming here, and he really is just trying to save his own butt, and he is just trying to get this battle to end, but it's a valid question to ask. When's it going to be enough? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? Yeah, right? And especially, who's he talking to right now? Who is Abner specifically talking to? Joab, right? And I told you, Joab, he doesn't forgive, right? He is an eye for an eye type of person. Well, what do they say, if everybody's plucking out their eyes, what's going to happen?
Nobody's going to have any eyes.
Well, yeah, we're going to be in a world filled with blind people, right? Because if everybody does the eye for an eye thing, nobody's going to have any eyes left, right? And so here Abner, he just killed Joab's brother. And he says, when will it be enough? Right? Because he did not want to kill him, right? So Abner, yes, he's a weasel. Yes, he's self-seeking, but he's making a really good point. He's like, dude, I didn't want to do this to your brother. When will it be enough? Don't you know the end will be bitter? He recognizes that the end's going to be bitter for him whenever Joab decides that the sword has not devoured enough quite yet. And Joab's probably like, oh, don't worry. The sword devouring, it'll be enough after I kill you, right? That's how Joab's going to respond, basically. Not right here, but in later chapters. But, I don't know. It's just, I just like, it's a good question, right? Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers? So now they're forming some sort of unity. And really, in many ways, Abner sounds like he would be a better commander for David's kingdom than Joab does. Because Abner's ideals sound more along the lines of David's. Right? And once again, Abner has ulterior motives. He's trying to save his own skin. He recognizes he's losing the battle. He is simply just trying to get his way out of it. But the things he's saying do align with what David would be thinking. Right? David, this is his thing. Right? We are brothers. Yes, Saul pursued him and was trying to devour him. But he's like, we're brothers. Right? And he lamented Saul's death. Because he's like, yes, you did all the stuff against me, but we need to be different. And David is willing to be the person who shows hesed and faithfulness. Right? He's the person who's willing to step up his game and actually be different. But not Joab. How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers? And Joab said, as God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until the morning. So what do you think about Joab's response there? So first off, what is he just saying? Like, what is he actually communicating? Like, what is, like, if you were to summarize his response.
If he never said, do the tournament thing, this would have never happened. Kind of.
Maybe, but I think he's more talking about what Abner just now said.
We didn't plan on stopping until you said something.
Yeah. He was like, we were going to keep on going until you said stop. He's like, we would have at least kept going till morning. He's like, yeah, eventually we would have stopped, but now that you say something, we'll stop. Kind of a weird response. So Joab does say, like, yeah, okay, we'll back off. That's fine. And so the battle, like literally the battle comes to an end just because Abner asked. He's like, can we like stop this? And Joab's like, sure. All you had to do was ask. It's like,
brotherly response right there.
what's that?
It's like siblings.
It is kind of like that, but also it's deeply ironic in a very twisted and morbid way because he still responds by calling them brothers, right? Abner's question is basically saying like, why are brothers pursuing each other at all, right? That's the point, right? We're supposed to be getting along. Why are we pursuing each other? And he's like, oh, we would have kept pursuing our brothers till morning. Joab does not care about brothers. He's like, oh, he cares about his brother, right? As we're going to see. But, like, he does not view them as brothers, right? He's like, you can call me your brother, but I'm going to pursue you no matter what, right? So it's very interesting if you just look at how they view this, right? Abner is appealing to their brotherhood as a means of, like, we should be friends. Where Joab's like, oh, no, I'll gladly pursue my brothers till morning. He's like, I'll kill you. But now that you've asked, I guess I'll stop. Totally different mindset, right? Like, literally, Joab was just out for blood to where literally all you had to do was ask him to stop. He's like, oh, dang, okay. I guess I'll go home. I was really having a fun time. And I honestly, I could have gone all night, but you're right. It's getting late. I guess I'll head back home. Like, totally different responses. But ironically, it works. And I imagine Abner's thinking, whew, got out of that one. But what did I tell you? What is the principle you need to learn about Joab? Don't mess with Joab. So Abner might think he got away. He did not get away. Right? He got away for a little bit. But it's not going to last. So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight anymore. Yeah. So Abner's like, dude, how long do we have to keep on fighting? When's it going to be enough? Can't we just stop? Joab's like, oh, why didn't you just say so? I thought we were having a pretty good time. I mean, like, this was fun. I mean, you sure? Okay, sure, that's fine. Okay, everybody, let's go home. Like, Joab, it's like war is just a sport to him, right? It's just like, oh, I was having a great time. I mean, I was, like, to be fair, he was winning, right? I mean, he's like, I only lost 20 guys. Y'all lost 360. This was a good game for me. Yeah, but Abner's like, I genuinely was wanting to play soccer. I was genuinely just wanting to play sports. And then you sent your guys over here. And what we see, right? Don't miss the point of this, right? Because it seems like a really random story. The point is that Joab and David have different ideals, right? David is over here showing nothing but kindness to Saul and the people of his kingdom. Joab is murdering Saul's people like it's a game, right? That's the difference. And it's like, it's very scary, and it's going to bring about a lot of messed up stuff. And that's why also, once you know what Joab's doing here, that's what makes it so scary whenever you get to 2 Samuel 11 and David sends the letter to Joab asking him to kill Uriah, right? Because you see how far David's gone, right? David's not just writing a letter to somebody being like, hey, will you do this? He's asking Joab to do something that he's like, oh yeah, Joab will be fine with this. If you are ever resorting to something that Joab is okay with, you're probably not in a very good spiritual state. Right? And so that's why we need this other stuff. Most people don't talk about Bible studies through this stuff, right? Typically, we just hop to David and Bathsheba. But when you know the backstory, it makes it a lot richer. So Joab blew the trumpet, all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight anymore. All right, guys, let's go home. Let's go back to Hebron. We killed enough today. But Joab, we were having fun. Get over it. Let's go. And Abner and his men went all that night through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, and marching the whole morning, they came to Mahanaim. So interesting thing about this, I mentioned that Hebron is in the south, in the Judah area, right? Mahanaim is actually, if you're picturing this, right? So there's the Dead Sea, Jordan River, Sea of Galilee. Go in between Sea of Galilee and Dead Sea. Jordan River right here. And Mahanaim's on the other side of the Jordan River. I'm not totally sure why they made their capital there. But they did. And so that's, like, I just say that because it explains why they're crossing the Jordan River. It's because they're literally in a different area. It also probably shows how inept Abner and Ishbosheth are to actually rule. Because if you're trying to unite the people, probably don't be on the other side of the river than most of them live. Because yes, the Jordan River is literally only like a few feet wide. But to the people of Israel, this is like a big dividing marker, right? I mean, if you were to go see it nowadays, you would think it looks like a ditch. But for the people of Israel, it is like, it's a big deal, right? And so, I don't know. I don't know why they put their thing there. It doesn't really seem like a smart move. David is like in the center of Judah, whereas they're like, yeah, we're going to go live over there. I don't know. So they crossed the Jordan, and marching the whole morning, they came to Mahanaim. Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner, and so you basically just have them going both of their own separate directions. And when he had gathered all the people together, there were missing from David's servants 19 men besides Asahel. Right, so 20 men total. Right, 19 people, Asahel being one of them. Being one in addition to that. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. And once again, that's a big difference. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father. All right, so who is Asahel's mother? Zeruiah. I'm literally just quizzing you on these names just to see if we can remember them because, this is one of those things where if I were like giving a test to my students, I wouldn't have them remember these names. But if you're wanting to understand the book of Samuel, you kind of have to remember a lot of these names. So Asahel's mother is Zeruiah, who is the sister of David, right? And so her husband... first off, what city did David come from? What city? Bethlehem, right? That's why why Jesus was also born there, right? David was born in Bethlehem, so he came from a family that lived in Bethlehem. So if Zeruiah married a man, where did he most likely live? Bethlehem. So Asahel's father probably lived where? Bethlehem. All right, just wanted to take us through that whole thing to show you that's exactly what we see. They took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem, right? Really, that's not, like, that whole logic thing is not important. I'm just showing you that, like, it makes sense why they're in Bethlehem, right? It's like, yeah, of course, because it's from David's family, and of course they'd be in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke upon them at Hebron. Right? So they stop in Bethlehem, they bury them, I guess they had just a quick burial, and then they just move on to Hebron. And basically both of them return to their capitals, and by the morning, they're both returned. Right? So it was kind of like weird. It's almost like it's like a day field trip. They both go to Gibeon, they have this epic battle, they chase them down, and then they both just depart, and by the morning, they're both back at their respective capitals. The difference is that whenever Joab and them go back, they just have 20 less people. Right? That's not a really big dent in their army. But Abner and them go back, and they're like, where'd your army go? Like, 360 people. That's a lot of people gone. And so if you're just looking at this, and you're viewing the whole book of 1st and 2nd Samuel as the story of the house of David versus the house of Saul, who is winning? House of David big time. Right? And so we do see that even though Joab is a pretty terrible guy who is just nasty and bad, David is still coming into power. Right? And there's really... What's that?
Also, like, just... also, it's like what it kind of like reflects on David. Like how it reflects on him.
Oh, yeah. It reflects poorly on him.
Yeah.
It reflects on him good in a power way, but Joab's reputation and stuff is not going to be good. Because it doesn't look good whenever... David's over here trying to be very diplomatic, and he's like, oh, I love Saul. I love all this stuff. And then, like, Joab, like David's commander, just goes out and, like, does all this. It's like, bro, like, I'm trying to establish a precedent, and I'm trying to bring peace, and you going and murdering 360 people is not helping. Like, nephew, can you please stop? But yeah, so it is establishing a precedent there. And so I just wanted to address the big picture stuff. All right. That is the chapter, and next week, what y'all are going to do is y'all are going to go into the death of Abner, because you don't mess with Joab, right? And so Abner, he is going to be the next obstacle that needs to be taken out of the way, and then after Abner's taken out of the way, who do you think the other person who needs to be taken out of the way is?
Joab.
Not Joab necessarily. Unfortunately, Joab is going to be here the rest of 2 Samuel. Literally, Ishbosheth, yes. Ishbosheth is going to be the next one because Ishbosheth's the acting king, right? But ironically, you know what's so funny? It seems like David recognizes that Joab is a total trash bag. Like, he's not ignorant of it. He just recognized that Joab is useful. And he recognized that Joab can get the job done. And so literally, during his dying breaths, whenever David is talking to Solomon, he's going to say, have my nephew Joab killed. He's going to be like, that guy, he needs to be killed. Like, now that I'm not the king anymore, like, I never had the guts to do it. He needs to be dead. And so he's going to tell Solomon, like, kill him. But Joab's going to be around this whole time. And so, yeah, there's that. So Abner needs to die because he's really the one who wants to be in charge. And so he's going to die next chapter. And then Ishbosheth, who's the one that Abner put in charge, he's going to have to die. That's the chapter after that. And those are the chapters y'all are going to cover while I'm out of town. Sean and Brianna are going to lead y'all through that. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And they're going to be recording it. And they're going to upload it on my channel so that while I'm in Israel, I can watch it and make sure that y'all all showed up and paid attention and interacted. All right? And I expect them to be the best Bible studies ever, so I'm watching. I'm kidding. But well, I am going to watch it, hopefully, if I can find a connection. Maybe me and Ben can watch them together. That'd be kind of fun. Okay, real quick, before we finish up, application-wise, what can we take from this? Right now we've understood the story. We've got to experience all the excitement of it. What lesson might we take away from this? And I don't always like forcing a lesson here. Right? I like to just understand what the Bible's saying first. But I think there's principles we can learn. What can we learn?
Know the intentions of the people that are below you, like you're in charge of.
Okay. Yeah, so try to understand the hearts of people. We'll never fully understand them, but it's good to try. What else we got?
Maybe asking God, like, what you should do before you, like, take things into your own hands. Because I feel like there's kind of, like, a contrast between, like, the first verse of the chapter is David inquiring of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That's, like, his first thing that he does. But the first, like, act of these people interacting with each other is Joab just going and doing something without talking to David or asking God what he should do.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a good contrast there, right? I mean, yeah, you got David, who literally, he's anointed king, and he's like, or even before he's anointed king, he hears that Saul's dead, and he sings this song, and he's like, God, is it time for me to go to Hebron?
Yeah.
And God's like, yes. Right? Like, so David is always submitting himself to God first. Whereas Joab's like, hey, you want to have a competition? Ooh, a bloodbath, my favorite type. And like he doesn't care, right? He's just doing his own thing. To go back to our question of the day that we did before the Bible study, whenever it comes to the knowledge of good and evil, David understands that knowledge is not his to own, right? So he always is asking of God. He's shawuling, right? He's saying, God, what is the right thing to do? What is the good thing to do? What is the evil thing to do? And how can I do the good thing? That's why throughout the Psalms, David's whole thing is, how can I be as close to you as possible, right? How can I be as near to God as possible? Because he knows that where God is, that's where the good thing is, right? He wants to pursue what God wants him to pursue. Joab doesn't care. Joab, he decides what's good and evil on his own. He's like, oh yeah, I'll figure it out. And unfortunately, Joab's morality is totally reversed to where he delights in what is evil. And the fact that David tolerates him is probably one of the things that bites David in the butt so much. But yeah, so there's definitely that, right? Maybe we should look to God a little bit more and ask God his opinion before we just jump into things. Fortunately, we also have Scripture to help us there. What else might we learn?
If you're having a problem with something, ask God, and it could stop. Similar to what the story.
Yeah.
They ask and they just stop fighting.
Or you know what? If you're having a problem with somebody, maybe you can just ask them. Also, I mean, yes, ask God, but also be like, hey, can we honestly, think about it. Think about how many conflicts would just be put aside if you just actually ask the person. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, but like Abner, literally, he just turns to Joab. He's like, can we stop? And Joab's like, oh yeah, why don't you just ask? Like, think about, like, if you have a conflict between somebody, usually the conflict is, like, it builds up because nobody's addressing it. What if you were just like, hey, we've got this issue between us. Can we, like, get rid of that? And then maybe just talk it out and get it over with, you know? I don't want to say that's a direct application from this, but, I mean, we at least have an example of that working here. And, I mean, from my experience, I think that usually is the best way to get it out of the way, right? I mean, just address it. Hey, I've noticed we have a conflict here. I would like it to be done. Will the sword devour forever? Another application I'd probably throw in here, and I've already kind of addressed this with the whole sword devour forever thing. And this isn't really an application like, ooh, I can leave here right now and apply this. It's more of like a mindset. Just the futility of human leaders, right? And I'm not saying, like, obviously God has appointed human leaders. We should respect them. We should submit to them. That's what God has given us. But I mean futility in the sense of there is never going to be an earthly kingdom that will be able to fulfill the kingdom that God has planned, right? Like, he will never be able to fulfill the ideals. The sword will devour. The end will be bitter. That is literally the whole point, right? That is where this earth is heading towards, right? The end will be bitter, and people, like, there's going to be death and destruction, and it's not going to be good. The cool thing is that there is an answer to Abner's question, right? Will the sword devour forever? No. Will the end be bitter? No. For some people, yes. But for us, we are placing our hope in the king that is to come, right? And that's the really cool thing, because we see the seeds of that kingdom planted right here. And in David, we get to see the early promises of the kingdom of God, right? David is turning to these people that have done so many evil things against him, and he's responding in grace and forgiveness, right? And he's foreshadowing what Jesus is going to do to a much more extreme degree. And so for us, I think that's kind of cool, to where we can read this story and we can leave with a little bit of hope. Because yes, Abner's question addresses the futility of human kingdoms in this life. But the cool thing is that we're not putting our hope in this life, are we? Our hope is in the Son of David, in Jesus, who came once in order to give us that forgiveness, and who is coming back again to establish that kingdom where the sword will not devour, where the end will not be bitter, and actually where there will be no end, right? And that's the really cool thing there. And so I think, if anything, there is an application just in our mindsets and how we can look at this story and we can see all the evil and turmoil and just political grossness going on here, and our hearts can testify to the fact that, like, this is not how it was meant to be, right? That's, everybody can agree with that, right? You don't have to be a Christian to look at this and say, there's evil going on here, right? This is bad. The cool thing is that we have the solution. And if we keep reading the story, we'll eventually get to that solution. And we're not going to have to wait as long as we think. We don't have to wait till we get to Matthew chapter 1 to get there. In just a few chapters, we're going to see that kingdom promised, right? Because God is going to show up to David and he's going to say, I'm going to give you an eternal kingdom. And he's going to promise that the Messiah will reign forever, right? And so that's cool. We're going to see that in just a few chapters. So David's kingdom starts in chapter 2, but the Messiah's kingdom and the promise of that kingdom is going to come in chapter 7. So we're going to be there in a few weeks, and so I'm really excited for that, and we might even split chapter 7 into 2 weeks just because it's such a crucial chapter in the Bible. It's not even that long, but I think I would like to go more in depth, so we'll see. But I don't know. I'm excited about that. So anything else y'all want to add to this before we wrap up? I'm going to miss y'all for 2 weeks. It's going to be a bummer.
Miss you too, bro.
But I do land 2 Tuesdays from now. I land at 7 p.m. So right when y'all start Bible study. And who knows? If I go really quick and my bags come in, I might be able to make it for the end of it. And then I'll promptly kick y'all out because I'll be tired. And I'll have work in the morning. But yeah, so that'll be cool. One of y'all want to close us out in prayer? Maybe somebody who didn't open us up in prayer at the beginning. Go for it, Rocky.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for everyone in this room that were able to be here. Thank you for this story, which was really interesting. And pray that David and Ben have a good, safe trip for the next 2 weeks and really enjoy being in the land of Israel. Pray that everyone here stays safe and healthy. And thank you for your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.